So we have officially arrived to technically the final part, or at least of the name of the history of Russia, with the last Romanov. And yeah, I know about this period. Many years ago, back in high school history class, we learned about, mainly the French Revolution, but we also learned about the Russian Revolution in, conjunction with that. And, obviously the Russian Revolution, with the rise of communism, with Lenin and Stalin, even the civil war that took place between the White and the Red armies, and just, the World War I period in general. It's just, a lot happened. And yeah, so Tsar Nicholas, the last, Tsar of Russia, well, you're gonna hear a lot of what I have to say as we watch the video. I'm not gonna talk up all of it right now, but as we go through the video, I'll pause and give you my thoughts and my opinions and just how I feel, like I usually do. So let's just get to it. Let's watch The History of Russia, Part 5, The Last Romanov, by Epic History.
In 1881, Russian Emperor Alexander II was assassinated by left-wing terrorists in St. Petersburg. Today, the place where he was fatally wounded is marked by the magnificent Church of the Savior on Spilled Blood.
Wow, that's quite a name. Also, this is a beautiful building. That's beautiful.
Alexander II had been a reformer, hailed as the liberator for freeing Russia's serfs. But his son and successor, Alexander III, believed his father's reforms had unleashed dangerous forces within Russia that ultimately led to his death.
Kind of reminds me of like the Caesar Octavian thing. Like what I mean is, okay, why did I bring up Julius Caesar? What I mean is because, on this channel we have a long-running Caesar series, well, 2 Caesar series. But, it's kind of like, Caesar had a tendency to be a bit merciful, especially to fellow Romans, and that got him killed, obviously. And Octavian was the complete opposite and went full on, I'm gonna kill everyone. I think, again, I don't have insight into the minds of these people, but I just think, like, Octavian saw what Julius Caesar did and decided, I think mercy is what got him killed. Maybe I'm going to be the opposite, Again, I don't know if that was his mindset. I'm projecting probably. But, it's kind of like, I compare it to this, right? Because, like, Alexander II obviously was taking steps into, reforming and whatnot, and to the radicals, he wasn't taking enough steps. There's always going to be the radicals who think, even if you're heading their direction, they're always going to be upset, like, you're not going hard enough, you're not going fast enough, And, I think, obviously, that got him killed, and, his son here is like, well, that got him killed, I'm going to do the opposite, like, it is kind of a fair mindset to have, right? Like, you see how it turned out for someone else, and you're like, let me try the opposite, see if that works, So I can definitely kind of understand where he's coming from, though obviously I think it would have been better for Tsardom to continue with the reforming area.
As emperor, he publicly vowed to reassert autocratic rule, declaring that, in the midst of our great grief, the voice of God orders us to undertake courageously the task of ruling, with faith in the strength and rightness of autocratic power. The Tsar's secret police, the so-called Okranka, was ordered to infiltrate Russia's many revolutionary groups. Those found guilty of plotting against the government were hanged or sent into internal exile in Siberia.
That's the thing about the autocratic power, like, we kind of saw the rise of constitutional monarchies, and that absolute power monarchies were kind of just falling out of favor, right? Like, and that's the kind of thing with Russia, is that, especially with like the last Tsar, Nicholas, trying to hold on to that autocratic power really didn't do well for them. Like, you know, like there had to be change, you know, to like, at least if you're going to keep the Tsardom alive, there definitely had to be changes. But, and also just competent leadership. We'll get to Nicholas when we get there. I don't want to jump the gun too fast.
Alexander III was a pious man who supported the Orthodox Church and the assertion of a strong Russian national identity. Russia's Jews became victims of this policy. They'd already been targeted in murderous race riots known as pogroms, after false rumors were spread that they were responsible for the assassination of the emperor. Now the government expelled 20,000 Jews from Moscow, and many who could began to leave the country. Over the next 40 years, around 2 million Jews would leave Russia, most bound for the USA. Concerned by the growing power of Germany, Russia signed an alliance with France, both sides promising military aid if the other was attacked. Sergei Witte was appointed Russia's new Minister of Finance. His reforms helped to modernize the Russian economy and encourage foreign investment, particularly from its new ally, France. French loans helped Russia to develop its industry and infrastructure. Work began on the Trans-Siberian Railway. Completed in 1916, it remains the world's longest railway line, running 5,772 miles.
Wow.
From Moscow to Vladivostok.
Dang, that's impressive.
Coming soon, a new Planet Fitness is opening near you. Join before we open and save $5 a month on our most popular...
Alexander III was succeeded by his son, Nicholas II. His coronation was marred by tragedy.
Yeah, I think people got trampled on. I believe they were offering, beer and pretzels or something? Don't jump on me if I get that wrong. You'll find I get things wrong on this channel, guys. By the way, I just want to say I'm not a historian. I never, you know, I'm by no means a historian. I don't take that title. I didn't go to school and get a history degree. I'm just a guy who likes history. At best, you can call me a history buff, you know. So I'm not vlogging through history, or Mr. Terry, who are both great, by the way. I love them. But you know, at best, you're watching a guy who's interested in history learn more about it. That's the best way I market myself. I mention that because, you know, sometimes I'll get things wrong, sometimes, and, you know, some guy, I think one guy in the comment was like, a historian should aim to always speak, you know, correctly, and I just kind of laughed. I'm like, you think I'm a historian? By the way, this is also another can of worms. Like, I guess the way I view historian is a bit weird. Like, the way I view it, I feel like calling myself a historian would be disrespectful to actual historians, and what I mean by that is people who went to school, got degrees specifically in history, you know, all that. And, you know, that's why I never claimed the title of historian. Like I said, I went to theology school, I got a bachelor's in theology, and I'm about to get a bachelor's in English. So, but there's still not history, you know? And, I always viewed, like, a historian as someone who, you know, obviously went to school and is a learned man in that subject. And I've had people disagree with me on that. Like, no, anyone who likes history is a historian. Like, one of my friends back in high school, we used to be big on learning about this, especially the French Revolution. We would just talk about it. He said, I'm a historian. Obviously, we were high school students. We were just, and I'm like, I don't know, I'm like, but a historian's like someone more official at this, you know, we're just high schoolers. And he's like, no, anyone who likes history can and talks about it can be classified as a historian. Again, I could be wrong. Like, maybe I am wrong in saying that I don't feel like I'm worthy to take on the title of historian. That's just how I feel about it. But I met people who disagree with me and would be like, no, like, if you're into it, if you're talking about it, you can call yourself a historian. It's a bit complicated. Just know through my point of view, guys, even if you don't agree, I don't consider myself a historian. I just consider myself a guy, an amateur whose my education, official education, is random classes from, elementary to high school and some college courses, but like I said, I never got a degree in history or any of that. Again, I don't know if you get where I'm coming from. I just would never market myself as a historian. At best, I'm just a guy, getting into trying to learn more about history. With that said, let's get back to this.
When 1,400 people were crushed.
Yeah, they were selling like food, and then some people were hungry, and then it just ended up getting trampled on, right? Trying to get to the food. At least that's how I remember. I could be completely wrong. Again, not an expert on this, but I'm just trying to go off knowledge I had like 8 years ago. So, yeah, it's been a while.
Death at an open-air celebration in Moscow. China granted Russia the right to build a naval base at Port Arthur. When China faced a major revolt known as the Boxer Rebellion, Russia moved troops into Manchuria under the pretext of defending Port Arthur from the rebels. This brought Russia into conflict with Japan, who also had designs over Manchuria and Korea. The Japanese made a surprise attack on Port Arthur, then defeated the Russian army at the giant Battle of Mukden. Russia's Baltic Fleet, meanwhile, had sailed halfway around the world to reach the Pacific, where it was immediately annihilated at the Battle of Tsushima.
Yeah, because Japan, kind of industrialized a little bit later from everyone else. Like, Japan for a long time was like an isolated, nation. And I believe it was America who essentially bullied Japan into opening itself, right? And then Japan went full on with the, industrializing and trying to establish itself as an equal power to the rest of the world. And they did do that. Japan was frightening. Like, from the time they industrialized all the way to World War II, Japan was kind of a frightening, like, power, and very brutal. Just, like, the things they did in China are insane and, like, awful to read about. But, and yeah, this is a big telltale, right? Like, Russia, who, was a much global power way before Japan took center stage, getting beat up, it was a huge sign of, like, how far behind they were getting, right? That something like Japan could face them and defeat them. And that was kind of one of the many things that helped Tsar Nicholas get very unpopular, right? Essentially.
Russia was left with no option but to sign a humiliating peace, brokered by US President Theodore Roosevelt. Meanwhile, the Tsar faced another crisis much closer to home. In St. Petersburg, a strike by steel workers had escalated, and plans were made for a mass demonstration. Tens of thousands of protesters marched to the Winter Palace to present a petition to the Tsar, asking for better workers' rights and more political freedom. But instead, troops opened fire on the crowds, killing more than 100. Bloody Sunday, as it became known.
Yeah, like I mentioned before, in a lot of revolutions, you kind of see that take place. Like with America, we have the Boston massacre where British soldiers fired on civilians. And you see it here. Like, a lot of revolutions, funnily enough, have a lot of trends to them. And, sometimes peaceful demonstrations or, like, groups of people getting shot by soldiers is something that just happens. It's tragic, but yeah.
Led to more strikes and unrest across the country. The crew of the battleship Potemkin mutinied, killing their officers and taking control of the ship. To defuse the crisis, Nicholas II reluctantly issued the October Manifesto, drafted under the supervision of Sergei Witte. It promised an elected assembly and new political rights, including freedom of speech, and was welcomed by most moderates. Russia's first constitution was drafted the next year. For the first time, the Tsar would share power with an elected assembly, the State Duma, though the Tsar had the right to veto its legislation and dissolve it at any time.
Tsar Nicholas essentially outplayed some people because, if I'm remembering correctly, especially with like the oversimplified video, he definitely put this out as an olive branch and immediately yoked it back, right? As he tried again to establish sole power as an autocrat. So yeah.
Sergei Witte finally lost the Tsar's confidence and was dismissed. The Tsar's new Prime Minister, Stolypin, introduced land reforms to help the peasants, while dealing severely with Russia's would-be revolutionaries, so much so that the hangman's noose got a new nickname, Stolypin's necktie. But having survived several attempts on his life, Stolypin was shot and killed by an assassin at the Kiev Opera House. Meanwhile, Grigory Rasputin, a Siberian...
Yes, Rasputin, who... He got friendly with the Tsar's family because he, I believe Tsar Alexander's son suffered, bleeding. The official name escapes me. Yes, it was hemophilia. Good, I just had to double check. So hemophilia, he suffered through that, and Rasputin, quote-unquote, healed him, or, helped him out a lot, and there are theories as to how he did it, because Rasputin was a faith healer. Some people would say quote-unquote faith healer. Either way, he ended up getting really good with the Tsar's family, like essentially like being with them and being friendly with the Tsar's wife. I don't think they slept together. No, I'm pretty sure they didn't, but they were friendly enough to, I think some people took it like that. And I think one of the most famous things about Rasputin is obviously he was a party animal. At least that's what I've heard. I'm not sure how accurate some of those sources are, so I'll refrain from treating that as fact. But, sometimes you'll hear about wild things like him being a party animal, a drunk, all that. And the famous story of how he died, like they tried poisoning him, and they tried shooting him, and they threw him in the... Like, essentially, he had a really long death, which again is something you hear about. But again, the circumstances surrounding his death are also some speculation, like how much of it is a little over exaggerated, I'm not sure, but I believe his body was thrown into the river. Also, he's a subject of that famous song, Rah Rah Rasputin. You know what I'm talking about. Yeah, so a very interesting guy, though I believe his presence in the Tsar's family life also was fuel for anti-Tsarists to kind of like make fun of the Tsar and just show like, be against it and whatnot.
Faith healer had joined the imperial family's inner circle, thanks to his unique ability to ease the suffering of the Tsar's hemophiliac son, Alexei. Despite sporadic acts of terrorism, Russia now had the fastest growing economy in Europe. Agricultural and industrial output were on the rise. Most ordinary Russians remained loyal to the Tsar and his family. Russia's future seemed bright.
And then World War I happens, and Russia gets joined in, and as we know, they do not do well. They have to pull out the war because everything else that happens. Yeah, for a brief moment there, right? It looks like things were on the rise for Tsar Nicholas. But yeah, again, World War I was just the toppling of so many empires and monarchs, right?
In 1914, in Sarajevo, a Slav nationalist assassinated Archduke Franz Ferdinand, heir to the Austro-Hungarian throne, sparking a European crisis. When Austria-Hungary declared war on Serbia, Emperor Nicholas ordered the Russian army to mobilize, to show his support for a fellow Slav nation. Austria-Hungary's ally, Germany, saw Russian mobilization as a threat and declared war. Europe's network of alliances came into effect, and soon all the major powers were marching to war. World War I had begun. Russia experienced a wave of patriotic fervor. The capital, St. Petersburg, was even renamed Petrograd to sound less German. An early Russian advance into East Prussia ended with heavy defeats at Tannenberg and the Masurian Lakes. There was greater success against Austria-Hungary, but that too came at a high price. Russian losses forced the army to make a general retreat in 1915. In 1916, Russia's Brusilov offensive against Austro-Hungarian forces was one of the most successful Allied attacks of the war. But losses were so heavy that the Russian army was unable to launch any more major operations. In Petrograd, Rasputin, whose alleged influence over the Tsar's family was despised by certain Russian aristocrats, was murdered, possibly with the help of British agents. The war put intolerable strains on Russia. At the front, losses were enormous, while in the cities, economic mismanagement led to rising prices and food shortages. In Petrograd, the workers' frustration led to strikes and demonstrations. Troops ordered to disperse the crowds refused and joined the protesters instead. The government had lost control of the capital. On board the imperial train at Puskov, senior politicians and generals told the emperor he must abdicate, or Russia would descend into anarchy and lose the war.
Yeah, it's kind of ironic and that Tsar Nicholas, in his attempt to hold on to all his power, ended up losing everything, right? Because that's kind of the big thing when you're an autocrat. When things go well, you get all the praise. When things go south, you get all the blame, right? And that's essentially what happened. Everyone just turned on him. He lost the support of the army, of the people, of everything, and he had to abdicate. And yeah, just not a good thing for him.
Nicholas accepted their advice and renounced the throne in favor of his brother, Grand Duke Michael, who effectively declined the offer. 400 years of Romanov rule were at an end. Russia was now a republic. A provisional government took power, but could not halt Russia's slide into economic and military chaos. Workers, soldiers, and peasants elected their own councils, known as Soviets. The Petrograd Soviet was so powerful it was effectively a rival government, especially as discontent with the provisional government continued to grow. The Bolsheviks, under Vladimir Lenin, attracted growing support, with their radical proposals for an immediate end to the war, the redistribution of land, and transfer of power to the Soviets. In October, they launched a coup, masterminded by Leon Trotsky. Bolshevik Red Guards stormed the Winter Palace, where the provisional government met, and arrested its members. Lenin and the Bolsheviks were now in charge.
Yeah, this is the period that we learned back in high school many years ago. You know, the rise of Lenin, the Bolsheviks, Soviet, as, you know, communism and the Soviet Union took over, you know, Russia, and it's, just insane, you know?
Russia had been thrown upon a bold and dangerous course. Under a Marxist-inspired revolutionary party, it would now seek to create the world's first communist state. But first, it would have to survive the chaos and slaughter of one of history's bloodiest civil wars.
So, yeah. We are done with the main series, but there are other videos to be watched, such as the Russian Revolution, so on and so forth. So, yeah, essentially that's the end of the autocracy. And you know, when it comes to Tsar Nicholas, I do feel bad for him, especially the way him and his family died. You know, they were shot in a basement, and I just think that's an awful way to go. Now, again, I know some people are like, he was an awful ruler, deserved it, you know. I'm just like, I can't help but feel some sympathy towards him. That doesn't excuse his bad ruling, right? It doesn't excuse the people who died and suffer under his incompetence. Like, you know, it's just, I don't know. I can't help but feel a little pity, especially just the way he went in front with his family. Like, especially his family. It's, I think, who I feel very bad for, his children. Like, you know, it really is just a gruesome way to go. You know? Again, I don't know the guy personally. By all accounts, loving husband, loving father. Maybe was a decent person if you knew him. Again, I never met him, so I'm saying this with a bit of hesitation. But, you know, obviously a bad ruler. Even if he was a nice person, personally, he was a bad ruler. And that doesn't excuse the people who died and suffer. It's just, I don't know. A part of me feels conflicted because I'm like, oh man, you know, I don't know. It's a bit complicated, my feelings about this subject. But, yeah, so that's the end of this video, guys. I'll stop right here. For the most part, we covered, you know, essentially just the fall of Tsardom, as we know, the rise of the communist, and overall just another very interesting video, full of facts. Like, I did not know about this. Longest railway, like, that's insane. But, yeah, I'm just looking forward to seeing more down the line, and I will see you all next time. So until then, bye everyone.